strike back.
It's Max something.
This is called a natural reaction. 12 years of study in one person martial arts. Huh? No, don't fire the first shot. Once,
I believe there's
once you were
liability and risk
touched,
involved
off
in
the
using
board.
I wouldn't do it.
Huh?
What's that, cheat sheets?
I did 3
Awesome.
different styles. I did Shaolin Kempo,
Very cool.
Wusu,
You're ready.
Rembukai.
I'd like to call this meeting to order for the Building Board for August 6th, 2013. Would you call the roll, please?
Okay. Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Strait? Mr. Fredine?
Here.
Ms. O'Donnell?
Present.
Mr. Brigham?
Here.
Mr. Michelson?
Here.
And Mr. Hopkinson?
Here.
And Mr. Boomer?
Here.
We have 8 members present.
We have a quorum. Please mute your cell phones if you haven't already. And do we have any disclosures of conflicts of interest regarding today's agenda? None? Okay. Move for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any opposed? Hearing none. Got approval of the agenda. And has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from our February 7th meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments or discussion? Call for approval just by show of hands. All in favor say aye, or hands. Opposed? None opposed, so that'll carry. Quick and easy that way. Appearance requests for public hearings. It looks pretty empty there, so we can forego that. Unfinished business is none. So we get right into the purpose of the meeting here, is to review AO number 2013-91. You want this whole title read in? Thank you. Do you have a presentation for us?
Yes, we do, Mr. Boney. Thank you. Also, for the record, here tonight at the staff table, I'm Sharon Walsh, Deputy Director of Development Services and the building official. Next to me is Jim Stubbs, Chief Structural Inspector, Lead Structural Inspector. On his left is Ross Knopfsinger, Manager of Engineering Services, and on his left, Derry Weaver, Director of Community Development. Okay. So the reason we're here tonight is for you to consider AO Anchorage Ordinance number 2013-91. It's under your charter as the building board to review and comment on legislation affecting Title 23, which this is part of. As a little background, AO 2012-62-S1 was approved September 25, 2012. The intent of that ordinance was to allow the option for private structural engineers and ICC, International Code Council, plans examiners to take responsibility for reviews on single-family and duplex homes. The reason given for the ordinance was to speed up the permit approval process. Assurances were made that private parties could and would execute reviews with the same impartiality and standard of care required of MOA plan review engineers. The Assembly debated the merits and ultimately approved the ordinance. But the Assembly did amend it to include a sunset clause so the effect of the ordinance could be evaluated at a later date. and that date is December 31st, 2015. AO 2013-91 has now been introduced to further refine the language of 2012-62S1. From here forward, I'll call them 62S1 and 91, respectively. So the intent of AO 91 appears to be to restrict the authority of the building official to enforce the building code and limit the ability of the building official to oversee the exempt plan review option for single-family and duplex homes. This is in the language on page 2, where the new language, that excerpt I'm reading at about line 15 on page 2, for permit applications submitted under this provision, it shall not be the responsibility of the building official or any other departments of the municipality to conduct any, new words, to conduct any review of the application for compliance with applicable building codes under review by the independent reviewing professionals. The building official shall conduct or cause to be conducted reviews for zoning, planning, address, flood, NEPDES, stormwater, and any other reviews unrelated to building code compliance, which are necessary for the project. So that's one intent of the ordinance, is to restrict the ability to look at these reviews or packages. The second main feature of the ordinance is to change the requirements for submittal documents for a permit application that would come in under the exempt option. And that's in the language on page 3, beginning with item C, which is all new language. And it limits the items that need to be submitted to two complete sets of building plans, 2 plot plans, stormwater discharge application, a letter or review signed by the appropriate independent reviewing professional, and a release of liability is required elsewhere in this section. Another new language is that supporting calculations and computations are not required to be submitted with the building permit application, but shall be kept on file by each independent reviewing professional until issuance of a final certificate of occupancy for the building. So that would make the requirements for submittal under this option different from the other applications coming in. And the last main feature of the ordinance is to repeal the sunset ordinance, or the sunset date, which is on the last page, line 7. So those are the 3 main features of the ordinance. Well, to help you in your consideration, we'd like to share our experience with the with 62S1 to date. And at that point, you can take up the items for discussion. We'll also be available for questions. While public record shows that the department did not support 62S1, upon passage, the department nevertheless made a concerted effort to put the exempt review process into place without delay. Policy AG 38 was developed as a blueprint for staff and the design construction community to make transition to the new process as easy as possible. And Tana has copies of that policy. It's available on the web, but we brought you some copies so you would have those to refer to. The policy actually was questioned by outside parties, and the ombudsman conducted an investigation as to whether the department was trying to obstruct the implementation of the ordinance, and the ombudsman confirmed that the department was making a good faith effort to put this process into play and determined that the policy was viable. So, in the last 10 months, approximately 35 exempt permits have been issued. The majority have been issued without delay. So the goal of speeding up the acceptance of an application, I would essentially say, has been met. Some applications have been rejected as incomplete, however, or one is illegible or involving an unapproved alternate means and methods. We can answer questions about those particular cases if you like, but essentially what it means is when the application was submitted, it's determined that something was missing from it. Either the plans could not be read, so it wouldn't be sufficient for the inspectors to use, or they included a feature that required alternate means and methods which the independent reviewing professionals are not authorized to approve. So we would turn those back and ask for them to bring in the alternate means, get that piece of it approved, then resubmit it as the rest of it exempt. So we have, at this point, several of the projects are being constructed in the field, or in the process of it. And we have noticed, with any new thing, we have noticed a pattern of problematic issues. Primarily, we have seen mistakes, just as our reviewers make mistakes. The third-party reviewers have been fallible. The third-party reviewers have not been consistent as a group. And one of the most difficult issues is that third-party reviewers don't seem to be requiring the documents to be prepared to the same standard of care that's been historically required by an MOA plan review. A particular problem is that there does not seem to be a standard of verifying that review comments are being incorporated into the final documents before the documents are approved. Typically, this is occurring when the drawings there will be review comments by the reviewing professional, valid review comments, and rather than having them on the documents, they're stapled to the drawings as a list of comments, but the drawings themselves haven't been changed, or they might be just in separate cover, and the contractor's supposed to review that, and the inspection's finding problems with that because, of course, the construction crews are working off the plans themselves. So, in contrast to the MOA standard, is that the MOA plan review engineers do not stamp approve on those drawings until all changes are physically made to the drawings. Now, that can be redlining and initial in some case, preferably redrafted, but in some cases, redlined before that approved stamp goes on. Additional issues that have come up is that the types of issues that come up is that details for collectors and drag struts, cords, deck ties, and the vertical load path to the foundation are incomplete or missing. Field changes have been a problem. They're not consistently being reviewed by third-party reviewers and submitted for inclusion into the permit documents. It also appears that some third-party reviewers are taking on design duties for field changes. The scenario where that's occurred is the designer of record isn't available, on vacation, fishing, whatever, on another job, and the reviewing professional says, well, just do it this way, and that's really not, they're supposed to remain independent and review the other's work. So that's been probably well-meaning help, but it's not in concert with the process. And finally, third-party reviewers can be hard to reach when the inspectors have questions. You'll see in the policy that should there be a problem, the inspector is first to call that reviewing professional, not our plan review people, but call the reviewing professional who signed it and say, we're seeing an issue here, and then that person in turn gets with the designer and back through. And that can be a problem when people are unavailable, so work has to wait. So with 2/3 of the 2013 construction season behind us, community development agrees that 62S1 needs to be modified, but not in the direction taken by 91. Rather, the department feels that the sunset clause should be maintained and an audit provision should be inserted. The audit provision should allow for a certain percentage of the third-party approved plans to be reviewed by the MOA to determine if the plans are indeed code compliant. That would be simultaneously with other work. It would not hold up the permits in any way. It would just be a checkup of parallel review. The audit provision, and I should mention most other jurisdictions that we've researched who are having this kind of process have an audit provision. The audit provision should provide details for actions to be taken against exempt permit applicants and design review participants who consistently fail to perform to the standard of care necessary to enforce the building code. This process can work as long as the reviewing professionals are working to the same standard of care, consistently amongst each other and with the MOA standard. But those that won't employ that standard of care should be coached into getting there or not be allowed to participate in the process. And finally, the audit information should be made available to the Assembly as the sunset date approaches to aid them in their decision of whether or not the exempt plan review option does indeed maintain adequate protection for the health, safety, and welfare of the general public, which is the intent of the adopted code. And with that, we're open to questions. As I said, Mr. Stubbs is here. He's been working very closely with most of the projects that are under construction, so can speak to those issues. Ross can talk about some of the alternate means questions that have come up. The last thing I will mention is the GAC, Geotechnical Advisory Commission, reviewed the ordinance at lunchtime today. They have concerns because our experience is showing that some geotechnical problems are not being, or geotechnical issues are not being attended to by the third-party reviewers. And the Geotechnical Advisory Commission is, concerned that when work is done in hazard zones 4 and 5 especially, that proper attention is being paid to the geotechnical situation. With that, we're open to questions.
Questions from the members? Ms. O'Donnell.
I have a question. Can you hear me? The changes that are being requested in Section C, having to do with not supplying calculations and computations that would normally accompany the building permit, I'm assuming that there's a specific reason why they do not want to furnish the backup information to be part of the public record in the permit folder. I don't understand why they would want to leave those out.
We can't really speculate either on that. You think of most of us as engineers, most of us have no qualms with someone else reviewing our work. In fact, that's a good thing. So we're not sure where that's coming from either. Ross, did you have anything to add?
No. Mr. Michelson.
Mr. Chairman, Serena, when I speak tonight, I'm only speaking as an industry mouthpiece. I don't necessarily have, but hearing, when we hold meetings at different associations, and the word that I hear, or the complaints that I hear, is that, and it's the same complaints, it's been for several years, you've heard me saying before, but you asked a question, and I'm trying to answer that, is that the industry feels, especially the home building industry, feels that they have qualified engineers, i.e. the Westbrooks and the Rick Buttons and such, doing their work, and then when the plans are submitted, they feel that you have junior engineers, schooled engineers, not necessarily seasoned engineers, telling the seasoned engineers that they're wrong. And the seasoned engineers are just getting exhausted with having to deal with the junior engineers. And that's the only way I can call them. I mean, schooled engineers but not field trained. And that seems to be the consensus. They tried to, the first time around, Mr. Trombley, I think, tried to eliminate that problem with his first ordinance introduction, and then there's been a couple cases, from what I hear, of some of the plans have been reviewed by some of the plan reviewers, and little or major, I can't contest to that, but issues have come up which totally stopped the process, and so some people in the industry got together and I guess persuaded Mr. Trombley to take it on the second time to clarify. Mr. Wheeler, the attorney for the city, had been contacted by the industry and asked if the industry was reading the ordinance right, or was the staff of the MOA reading the ordinance right, and it was Mr. Wheeler stated to some of the industry individuals that the industry was reading the first ordinance correct, and it did not have to be re-reviewed, and calculations did not have to be submitted. So does that answer your question? Well, I know it was long-winded, but I was trying to do it delicately, which is not something I'm used to.
Mr. Michelson, I think you might have misunderstood my question. I understand that the intent is that the rewrite is requesting simply to leave out the supporting calculation and computations. It also acknowledges that the plan reviewers are not reviewing. It's being done by an independent party. However, I still think that it should be a part of the submittal package as a complete package to have it as part of the public record that's available for review by anybody who needs to review that particular set of building plans at any point in the future for any reason. I can access any building that was built simply by asking for archive, and I can review it. Now, for what purpose, I'm not sure, but I think that it's important to maintain it as a public record, specifically if there's an error or a fault that happens a couple of years after the permit is closed and there's a failure of some sort. I think it's important for investigative purposes to maintain that information. I also agree that it's important to have an audit provision for this. It's not a separate plan review, and I think that I would want to make sure that that's being clarified, that an audit is not a secondary plan review, that they wouldn't be charged an audit fee that's a plan review fee in disguise. But I do think that for information mining, to understand how this process works and how successful it is, you have to be able to audit it. And to be able to audit it, you need to have all the information in front of you. So I would be opposed to supporting this rewrite in its format. I think that it's irresponsible.
I'll try answering the question one more time, Serena. It's been found by a few people that have utilized this ordinance that the plans were being re-reviewed on a lot more than an audited basis. I won't say every one, but a large percentage of them were being re-reviewed. As far as the load calculations in single-family houses and duplexes, if you have a failure, the load calculations usually aren't going to tell you where the failure was. It's usually a connection failure or something done in the field. And your opinion's valid, and I'm just trying to answer why it was done, that I know of.
Would staff like an opportunity to address this issue, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. To clarify, in two cases, a project was submitted as through the normal process, and review comments were made through the normal process. The engineer involved, the designer, disagreed with the comments. It was the same person on both projects.
When you say normal process, are you...
Regular submittal process,
Okay,
non-exempt.
where it's getting a municipal...
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Withdrew the application and resubmitted it as approved with as another engineer signing it as reviewed. So in that case, we did do the review because it came in as a regular process. What was disturbing is that the comments had not been addressed on the documents that were approved by the other engineer. We did follow up to do a check, to do some calculations just for our own comfort that the members were sized properly and so on, to answer the questions that the original reviewer had asked for ourselves. And there's a reason that we do that. And those of you who are registered engineers or architects, this is a Code of Professional Conduct for registrants, State of Alaska, 12 AAC 36210, Professional Conduct. And it states that a registrant, and this is item 8, and that is anyone holding a license, regardless of who you work for, if you work for the municipality or the Man in the Moon, you may not knowingly design, lay out, certify, approve, or otherwise imply or certify as suitable or fit for use a project in violation of applicable federal, state, or local laws relating to the practice of architecture, engineering, land surveying, or landscape architecture. In other words, if you have a concern with the way something is designed and you do not, and you ignore it, you are breaking the code of professional conduct, and you can lose your license, and we all take that quite seriously. So in those two cases, after we'd done an initial review through the regular process, yes, we did go and do additional calculation to verify that the materials were, or that the designs were viable. And in the most recent case, things were sized properly. However, there was no lateral connection system at all shown on the drawing. So, and that was not altered. That omission went forward to the field. So that's the kind of thing an inspector may ask about if the inspector is aware. So that would be an example. As far as all other of the reviews that have applications that have been accepted, the routine has been, and Ross can elaborate a little bit, for a plan review engineer to come to the counter to verify that it's a complete set of drawings, includes, foundation, framing, roof, whatever's needed. Is that's there, that there's calculations that have been done. We don't review those calculations. We just, it's a cursory review, and this is part of the process the ombudsman investigated, to be sure that there are calculations and that they match that particular house. We have had situations where someone's grabbed the wrong calculations off a desk and brought the wrong ones that don't match the project. Also, quickly verify the wind and seismic parameters that are being used in the calculations. That's been the extent of any review. Russ, do you want to elaborate?
Yes. So basically, when a project comes in, we just do a quick 5 to 10 minute check of the calcs to make sure that lateral calcs are there, gravity calcs are there, and that they match the project. To do an actual plan review of the calculations would take a couple hours. And on none of the projects that have been submitted under this exempt ordinance have any of the calculations been reviewed for code compliance. They've just been checked to see that they actually match the house that's being submitted and don't belong to some other project.
Other questions? Mr. Stubbs, what are you finding out in the field as you're working this program?
Well, Mr. Chair, one of the things this has done is it's taken myself and my inspectors on the structural side more into a plan review plus doing the inspection in the field. And it's been problematic. I think we probably spend between a third and half more hours in the field. We just had one recently that it took 5 inspections to get through a framer because the plans were so weak with detail that the framer had missed most of the straps, most of the connections. We told them to get back with their engineer of record. He wasn't very helpful. They'd call us back out again for another inspection. There would still be things missing. Finally, my inspector said, "Man, I'll try to help you. I'm not an engineer." And he said, "This is what we see. We've seen thousands of buildings." And he said, "This is typically how we strap it together." And they continued to work through it. And then finally, at the very end, the engineer did produce something, and lo and behold, it was the same thing that our inspector had told them to do. But, it delayed it, I think, 10 days by going through this. Usually we have an inspection. Some of them pass it the first time. Some of them have a few write-ups, and we come back in a day or two, they're corrected. But in this one, it delayed it out 10 days, so it just takes more time. When the plans first come in, they come to me. And I do a quick review of them just to look at them to see what we're getting into in the field, to make sure something hasn't been missed before I even go out there, to kind of know what we're looking at. Because right now, we're doing between 12 and 16 inspections a day per inspector. And it's very troubling to go on a job and bang, you're there for 2 hours and you haven't even made it through the top floor coming down. We just can't do that because we have concrete waiting. We have certain inspections that are time sensitive that you've got to get to. Plus, we have other people who have gone through the process. They're waiting for us in good faith. So when we get the ones that have come through and haven't had the plan review from MOA, which cleans up a lot of issues. It really does. I mean, people may say, well, it takes too long. I tell you, when we go in the field, I've been doing this 21 years. There is a difference in quality.
Mr. Straight.
Question about auditing, Ms. Walsh. Is there any current process for auditing the current plan review setup? Is there ever any way that once the plan reviewer has gone through a set of drawings, is there any audit process to verify that they've done their job similar to what you're requesting along with this?
I'll let Mr. Knopfsinger speak to that.
We don't have any like formal regimented audit process, but the 3 and now 4 structural plan reviewers work closely with each other and constantly bouncing ideas and issues off each other, and when they get something new they haven't seen before and don't understand, they discuss it together. And they also get involved with looking at each other's projects when the other reviewer's out of the office. So a typical plan review in our office multiple reviewers can end up looking at one plan review, and it does happen quite frequently. So we don't formally audit people's work because we feel that there's enough of a mix just taking place within the office that we're covered and that we're being consistent.
Thank you.
I have one last question.
Ms. O'Donnell.
I just wanted to clarify the language at line 17 on page 2, where it says, and I'll start at the beginning of the sentence, for permit applications submitted under this provision, it shall not be the responsibility of the building official or any other departments of the municipality to conduct any review of the application for compliance. I don't understand how to interpret this. Is this conduct any review, does that mean check for completeness? As I understand, when you take in a set of anything, you have to check for completeness. Is that being misconstrued as plan review?
I could respond, Mr. Chair. The ordinance, I think the key to what you're asking is in Part C, where Part C says that a complete permit application shall include 2 complete sets of building plans. Now that's question 2, what's a complete set? So it would still require looking to make sure that, like we said, foundation, framing, roofing plans are there. 2 plot plans, these 5 items. And then if you go further on to D, it says, the building official will confirm the application includes the materials required by C. So basically, you would go down this list and check off that they're there. If you go further, there's some deleted language on page 5, the language in brackets starting on page 6, that says when the building official finds the application complete, the requirements for acceptance of plan review and building code of compliance responsibility of independent reviewing professionals, the building officials will stamp the accepted plans. That's no longer there. It just says that for applications submitted under this provision, the building official shall stamp the accepted plans and specification accepted. So it's a little bit circular because you still have to check off these 5 items. So that's how we're reading it.
So my question becomes, is somebody going to interpret this language as line 17, conduct any review, to limit the ability of the MOA to prevent them from checking for completeness?
It seems to be a little circular because, yes, that's what the language on page 2 would say, but the language on page 3 says you still check to be sure you have 2 sets of plans, 2 plot plans, this and that.
Mr. Michelson.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. O'Donnell, on line 17, the way I read it, and it starts on 15, for permit applications submitted under this provision, it shall not be the responsibility of the building official or any other departments of the municipality to conduct any review of the application for compliance with applicable building codes. Doesn't say nothing, doesn't say anything about completeness. So again, we're back to checking the calculations of building code issues. That's the way I interpret it, and that's the way I was explained to.
Mr. Steele.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to stand this to sound like discussion, but I guess I'm throwing it out to staff for some understanding. We're sitting here with an ordinance that has got a rewrite. It's got a constituency, obviously, for it having come this far. When we ask questions about it, everyone is giving their best kind of history or analysis of it, but I'm not sure I'm really hearing the author speak of it. I hear Mr. Michelson speaking for the industry, but I'm not necessarily sure I understand that that's his role. He certainly didn't define anything in terms of any pre-introductions. But I guess my question here is the expectation that we modify this language, or is it just that we comment on the level of this? Because without the author here that can address the intent or the understanding, I'm not sure that I'm real comfortable jumping into the arena of editing anything if a motion moves forward. So I just throw it out for maybe the perspective on staff and how we should be dealing with it.
Well, then the same question came up from the Geotechnical Advisory Commission this noontime, and we emphasized to them, as we do to you, our responsibility is to bring it to your attention that this is here. We can give you our experience with the ordinance 62S1. We can tell you our position, but that's strictly as information to you. We are not in a position, or should be, of asking you to do this or that. It's up to you to discuss amongst yourselves. Your charter is to determine, is to review legislation involving the building code and make recommendations as you will. You can endorse, you can not endorse, but the GAC is taking the option of modification. They're putting together a resolution that they think there should be an audit provision and the calculations should remain in. I believe that's the key pieces of it. That's what they determined was important, to let the Assembly know, to advise the Assembly that they felt, these items should be considered. So it's completely up to you as a group to discuss and decide. Your position as a building board is, like ours, to consider the health, welfare, and safety of the greater citizens of Anchorage, or the citizens of the greater Anchorage area.
Thank you.
Mr. Straight?
If I may speak to that question a little bit, I took the liberty of contacting a few of the people that helped write this the first time and got their input this afternoon on why this was coming about. And the feeling I get from them is that they feel that the original ordinance was set up in such a way that there would be a review by a third-party engineer. It would go to the Muni and get a stamp if they had the calcs, if they had the drawings, and it would go out the door. What they're trying to address here is that they feel that the wording of the current ordinance allows the municipality plan reviewers kind of a foothold to get in there and still review it and still come back with comments. That is what my understanding is that they're trying to address by this. That's why they're trying to pull out the calcs so that there's not calcs there to be reviewed. That's why they're trying to change the language so that it can be clarified in such a way that the plan reviewers and the MOA do not review the drawings at all. So that's my understanding based on discussion with Bill this afternoon. I just want to put that out there.
Mr. Ferdine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 points at this point in time. Number one, Going back to the state regulations there that you have, Ms. Walsh, regarding your field modifications by the third party, there's a section in those regulations regarding field modifications that cannot be done by another registered engineer without the first registered engineer knowing about that. So if you find that in the field, you can send that to the state licensing board inspector and have them follow up with that third-party engineer to ensure that they got concurrence from the original signer. That is a regulation action against their license. The other item that I was going to ask was, since this is an ordinance that's more for our review and not for our modification, is staff going to be proposing language requesting, for instance, the verbiage for the audit? Will the city's attorney be putting together that verbiage and placing it in the right place so that those of us here don't have to try and wordsmith something tonight, if that is the way that the board feels?
Well, Mr. Weaver can probably help out this a little bit, but timing is part of an issue. The ordinance was introduced as an addendum item late on Friday before last for introduction to the Assembly that following Tuesday. So that was the first we had heard of it, was late that Friday. We were able to put this meeting together and the JAC meeting together and look at it ourselves in the interim. It will be open for public hearing, up for public hearing and action next Tuesday. At this point, there's not an Assembly work session scheduled. I believe, and this is where Mr. Weaver can help, I believe that we are able to write a memorandum to the Assembly, but I'm not sure exactly what our abilities are to put forth a position.
Mr. Chairman, obviously we'll be at the meeting and speak to it on the floor, but our intention is to discuss it with administration and put forward a recommendation from the departments so they have it in written form before the meeting.
This is Mr. Ferdine. I'll follow up on that, Mr. Chair. And then I appreciate that in the past Assembly meetings regarding ordinances similar to this, it does not seem like the Assembly has asked the staff's opinion on these items until it's so late in the game that basically noses are counted and people just decide not to state anything for the staff. And that's what I'm concerned about, is making sure that the Assembly gets the written recommendations and why behind, so that all the Assembly members can hear that, because it doesn't tend to show up.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ferdine, we concur that it's important to have that written information before them, before they're making their decision. That's why we fortunately had to convene you in such a short notice, as well as the Geotechnical Commission. We appreciate that, but because you are the experts in that area and they really need your input.
If I could add to that, I'm remembering some prior ordinances where you have you've offered a resolution or a suggestion that the ordinance be postponed so that a work session could be held with yourself and the Assembly. That's something you'd be free to do. They don't need to accept that suggestion, but you can certainly put an idea forth like that. Correct?
Any additional questions? Mr. Michelson.
I was hoping one of the other engineers on the board would have asked this, but do either of you, any of you engineers on the board, this thing that Ms. Walsh stated, that an engineer, if they see something that's wrong, I think is what she said, if you see something that's wrong, it is your ethical duty to mention it? Is that what I'm hearing? So, just an example, Mr. Ferdine, if you went by one of my sites and you saw that I put a stud in wrong and you're supposed to turn me into somebody, or, I mean, that's I'm just asking, is that your ethical duty then? I'm asking this really just for clarification, but
Mr. Fredine, do you care to answer that?
On record?
yeah, I'd like to hear it because
I would say if you go to an ethics course on engineering for licensure or architectural licensure, yes, as a professional engineer, if we see a life safety issue by ethics and by our license and the regulations, we are bound to tell somebody that is a life safety issue and you need to correct it. One of the classic stories is they tell you when you go by a job site, never peek your eye inside one of those boards with the hole there, because if you look through that hole and you see something wrong and you walk on, our licenses can be taken away from the ethical sections of 36210 right there.
and that's if someone turns you in then.
That would be correct, sir. Anybody, you can turn yourself in. But any member of the public can turn any licensed engineer or architect or land surveyor in based on these regulations. And that's why we have quote-unquote professional licenses.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other question, I just out of curiosity again, I was playing on the internet and tried to go into the Muni website to find out what the actual task of this board is, and all I can get out of it is the most I could find is that it is to resolve issues between an appellant and staff relating to the codes. And if someone could, actually seriously, if you could get me a copy of what this board is actually tasked with.
That should be, we can get you another copy. If you remember last year, I think we gave everyone a copy of the regulations that, we gave everyone a notebook, I believe, that includes the regulation, AMCR, Anchorage Municipal Code of Regulations, which is separate from the code at AMC, and that's where it talks about your board and what your charter is, what items you're supposed to deal with. And yes, some items are appeals. You're also empowered to hear appeals of a like a notice to vacate, or if we should make some kind of code abatement type case. You hear those appeals as well, and to review legislation concerning Title 23.
Yeah, like I said,
That is in
it might be
AMCR.
there. I just couldn't find it. I looked and looked and looked.
I can get that for you, or Tana can get that to you tomorrow.
Mr. Fredine?
Mr. Chair, if I can have a follow-up there. Mr. Michelson, I believe the section that Mr. Walsh was referring to was that an engineer cannot submit knowingly code violations in there. That was what she was referring to in the ethics, is that you cannot knowingly design something that's wrong. That's, as opposed to the pointing out that that was the intent of her comment.
Actually, I need to correct you, Mr. Fredine, because no, we are speaking about if we inadvertently see something in one of these completeness checks. For example, we had one, it actually, the first couple times went by because it was just such a fast check, and the third time noticed that the designer had approved a wood grade beam on top of piling. And on top of that, also had approved for that wooden grade beam to be buried below grade, where code requires concrete. It says shall be concrete. So we had two issues. We had the moment resisting properties of the wood versus the concrete that had to be calced out and double checked. And we had a deterioration issue going on with wood in contact with the ground. Untreated wood, it was regular wood glulam beam, just essentially being buried. So we had to stop that and stop the work, and we asked them to submit an alternate means and describe how they were going to waterproof that beam, and those issues did get worked out, and we moved on once the alternate means was approved. But had we seen that and closed our eyes to it, we'd be liable.
Any additional questions? I'll hold for a motion on the on the ordinance? Mr. Steele?
I'll second that, though I can't repeat it.
How you doing keeping up? Well. Let's make sure we get it in the minutes correctly here.
I'm sorry, that was too long to sit here and write out. I tried to speak slow.
Okay.
If I may, I took the liberty of writing one up that sounded very similar to the way you wrote it, to what you've said. That I don't know if it would be worth throwing out there. It's a little more succinct with some bullet points, if you like bullet points.
Well, I think the process, and I'm more than willing, is you can do a substitute motion and follow that path.
All right. I'd make the following substitute motion, and I have this written up. I can hand it to you if you'd like. In regard to AO number 2013-91, the Building Board makes the following recommendations. The MOA should still check for completeness of permits. Completeness should be clearly defined by MOA policy. Structural calculations should still be submitted to the MOA for the record. An audit provision should be added to the process. However, the process should be independent of the MOA by a third party, and it should include a review of both exempt and non-exempt permits. The auditor should not be aware of which is which. The sunset clause should be kept, but should be extended for 2 years. Those were the points I came up with.
When you say extended for 2 years, meaning to 2017? Or to keep I believe it's 2015 that's in here? That was in here, essentially?
Then I withdraw that last point. I was incorrectly thinking it sunset at the end of this year.
No, it's on that very last page on the 7th line there, the sunset date of December 31, 2015. Da-da-da is hereby repealed.
I withdraw the last point.
Is this, I'm not exactly sure how to do it. Is this acceptable to the...
Mr. Chairman, to just cut through it, it would be acceptable to me, except I think it needs to modify the language that is now saying hereby repealed for the sunset. If I'm understanding you withdrew the bullet. I suggest you keep the bullet, but put in the date 2015 if the intent is to maintain it, perhaps.
That is correct, yes.
It would be acceptable to me as proposed.
Acceptable to the second?
Acceptable to the second.
Okay. Ms. O'Donnell?
I have a question. In your motion, you're requesting an outside or third-party auditor review both plans submitted under the alternate process and regular MOA submitted plan review. Should we be concerned that that would require alternate funding?
So that's an excellent question, but I feel at the same time that an audit by the municipality plan reviewers of anything permitted through this process is just setting up to fail. The reason for that is the MOA plan reviewer's job is to find errors in drawings and make comments on it. They are very good at their jobs, and they could find, I guarantee you they can find things wrong with just about anything, even stuff that's been through other reviewers. So I feel, in all fairness, to give this a chance, it needs to have both things that have been, permits that have been through this process as well as permits that have been through the MOA process, both for a benchmark and just it would be a backup for your guys' reviewers. I think, in all fairness, they should both be done simultaneously. I know the MOA does have a third-party reviewer on a term contract, I believe, that perhaps they could be brought in for this sort of purpose.
I think that's a good idea.
Other questions or discussion items? You don't necessarily discuss a number or percentage of review in this. It's kind of left open as far as that goes. Intentional or non-intentional?
Intentional. I'm no expert on auditing or the best ways of doing it. If anyone here has a good suggestion, good to bring it in. But I believe that what we're doing here is offering suggestions to the assembly. We can suggest something specific. We can leave it up to them.
Or leave it adjustable, that depends on if they find much, then the more they find, the more they can open up, the less they find, the quicker they can close down, type thing. Is that the intent? No other questions? We ready for vote? Ready to call?
Mr. Hawkinson.
Yes, I vote for
Yeah, just, I can see a problem already. The motion is set in favor of the document or against the document here? I think there's a major, that was part of his hesitance. Which way does it read? Okay. Basically, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, you're accepting with amendments?
Making recommendations for the consideration of the assembly.
So
So it'd be, I suppose, a document we would be sending to the Assembly.
So it's,
So we're not making a motion on the actual document?
We're suggesting recommendations.
it's to accept this document with amendments is the motion.
I don't know if the wording that Mr. Straight has, even though it was a good job, I do like your wording, but I just don't know, without someone else higher than us looking at it, to know if the words can even be put in there. I think they can, but
All you can answer what's written here.
If I may, the way I see this going is the Assembly's going to do their thing, and if we give them recommendations, hopefully they'll take that into consideration, but I'm not seeing us as putting specific language forth to be added to this ordinance.
As I reread this, yes, he's just basically making a recommendation here to change the document. So as I would read this, the first step would be to accept these amendments, and then the second step would be to accept or reject the ordinance with amendments if they pass.
Mr. Chair, the way I think I understand this is that the motion that was made and seconded is a statement of recommendations to the Assembly. We do not accept this ordinance as written. We make the following recommendations, period. I don't think we have the power to approve or deny this ordinance proposal.
Well, I think we've got the power to send our, our acceptance or our recommendations. So are we doing this as a one-step or two-step is my only question now. Are we going to do the amendments first and then the document, or are we doing it all in one? You made the motion. What was your intent here?
I do believe the motion is actually Mr. Steele's, and
Okay.
passed.
As accepting the amendment, yours is now before us in terms of a vote. And the way I understood your intent is that you are suggesting recommendations to the language as written be forwarded to the Assembly for their inclusion in the ordinance. And period. That's how I interpreted it.
That is correct. And I think whether we make a recommendation or not regarding yes or no on the official document, a yes or no to them doesn't mean nearly as much as a list of recommendations of how to improve it.
Okay, so the first step is just the recommendations.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if, we can take many, many steps, but I'm ready to act on this, and I don't know that I'm necessarily seeing another step necessary, but we'll see.
Mr. Chair, may I offer a point of clarity?
Go ahead, Ross.
The ordinance is quite simple. The essence of it is to not require structural calculations be submitted and to eliminate the sunset clause. So both of the proposals there have been countered to that the calculations should be required. So in essence, the proposals do not support the ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
So for simplicity's sake, that would seem to be your starting point. That the board does not support the ordinance, and here's what we recommend. Just trying to simplify things.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get around to three parts, making the three-piece step. Mr. Fredine?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I recommend that we move forward with a vote per Mr. Straight's recommendations, that these are recommendations forwarded to the Assembly, and then we do a second vote on if the board is in favor of the proposed modifications to the ordinance, and then if the board so does choose to have an opinion on the ordinance as a whole, that would be a third step. But I would agree with Mr. Steele that my position on step 3 at this point would be having either an up or down vote on the ordinance itself, since that has already been put in place earlier.
As I understand the procedures here, we've got a motion on the floor to incorporate some amendments, so we'll vote on just those amendments first of all. That we will include...
Excuse me, point of order. I believe it's recommendations. All we've formulated is a motion to
Correct.
forward recommendations.
I stand corrected. So structural calculations, an audit program, and a sunset clause be kept.
And I believe there was a first point there too, clarifying that we would still like the MOA to check plans for completeness, ensure that all parts are there.
Right. Okay, so that's this vote here. Now let's go for vote.
All right. Mr. Steele?
I support the motion as written.
Mr. Straight? Mr. Pradine?
Yes.
Ms. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman?
Yes.
Mr. Michelson? Mr. Hawkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Bowman?
Yes.
So 7 yes to 1.
Okay. Then I guess I'm looking for a motion to AO 2013-91 as amended. Mr. Ferdinand?
Mr. Chair, I would, since motions are supposed to be in the positive, I would make a motion that the board is in favor of the proposed changes to ordinance 2013-91.
Looking for a second?
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any additional discussion?
So this would be, since all motions are in the favor, if you disagree with the changes, then this would be a no vote on this particular.
Any questions? We all know what we're voting? Okay.
Okay, Mr. Steele?
No.
Mr. Straight? Mr. Pradine?
No.
Ms. O'Donnell? No. Mr. Brigham?
No.
Mr. Michelson? Mr. Hawkinson?
No.
Mr. Boney?
No.
7 noes and 1 yes.
Toward staff, do we want to go any farther with this or just let this carry at this point?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's pretty clear what your intention is, so we'll put this in the form of a resolution for you and get it back. So we'll distribute it electronically, hopefully tomorrow, and then we'll move it forward.
Concur. Next thing on the agenda is reports. Can you give us an update on the 2012 code cycle adoption, please?
Short update on the admin portion of the code. The committee has concluded its meetings. We have had, we're halfway through kind of looking at the 95% draft with all the changes that we talked about in initial meetings. That's an in-house committee with legal and whatnot. As soon as we have the rest of the language written in there, we have a meeting scheduled next week for hopefully to finish that, just to double check with legal all the different things that we talked about. Then I'll distribute that to the entire admin review code committee, including all the industry people, and get their feedback. And then we will take the finished product forward with the rest of the package, which Ross will speak to.
So the Structural Code Committee, I think, has like one more item to vote on. Hopefully they can do it by email. We're in the process of compiling all the changes that went through the committees into a single document. Unfortunately, we got so busy this year that we have fallen behind on this a little bit. I apologize for that. Starting to stress over that a little bit, but we're working on it.
I missed a part there. This has gone to legal or will be going to legal?
No, this has not gone to legal yet. We'll send it to legal probably right about the same time that we take it to the board.
And to clarify on that, the admin code, we had a representative from legal department attending almost all of our meetings on the admin code. So when I meant legal, that's what I meant, was just checking with our guy to make sure we got all our language the way we all intended to. Then the whole package will go to legal as the new Title 23.
With hopeful adoption scheduled for when?
January 2014, hopefully.
Jan 1-ish?
Yep, that's the goal. A lot of people have put a lot of work into this process.
Mr. Fredine?
Can staff update us on the process of the State Fire Marshal and their adoption of 2012? Are you aware of where they are in their cycle?
Oh, goodness. So a little side note on that, the State Fire Marshal's Office gave a copy of their proposed 2012 amendments to all their deferred jurisdictions, and I did a very thorough review that took me several days, and I tore it all up. And no, you'll thank me for this, for anybody that works in the building code and the fire code. And then I sat down with them for several times and had some heated discussion at times about some certain issues, but eventually I got them to throw out a bunch of stuff, and which will bring their building code and fire code more on par with Anchorage. They would not, so because they did that kind of internal process where just us government types looked at it first, they actually haven't released it to public comment yet. So what they wanted to do was clean their documents up, then release them to public comment, which for the state, it seems like it takes quite a long time. I don't have any numbers I could give you in terms of their goals and their deadlines and whatnot, but I think overall, I think Anchorage is probably going to be ahead of them with adoption of the 2012 codes, unless we run into some unforeseen problems with our assembly or something.
Any other reports? Staff?
There is not a report so much as just a note. There are some terms expiring in October of this year for people. And I had that right here. And it's not popping out at me, of course. But the first thing to do is to, the normal process for board appointments, first is confirm the attendance records of people who are up for consideration as for another term. And also, here we go, and to ask if those people wish to be considered for reappointment. And so those people are Skip Bringman, Tom Looney, Paul Michelson, and Scott Boney. So if you're one of those four and you'd like to be considered for reappointment, you should let Tana know, and we'll go forward.
I got 3 of the 4. Boney, Michelson, Looney, and
Bringman,
Freeman.
Skip Bringman, Tom Looney, Paul Michelson, Scott Boney.
Thank you. Any other reports? Or board member comments?
I have a brief question for staff. I believe the last time we met was a 3-panel board meeting that we settled the issue of the partial height blocking. I have not followed up on that and seen if that handout has been updated. First of all, has it been updated? How is that going? Has it caused any problems? Is that being implemented by the builders?
Yeah, I haven't heard any problems. We did update the handout. And Jim, maybe you could speak to what you're seeing in inspection, because some of this is probably going straight to inspection and not to plan review.
Yeah, the biggest thing I see is people aren't following what was given to them out there to use. They're trying to use a hybrid of maybe option 3, 4, and 5 altogether, so it doesn't work. And some of the plans are coming out without the correct option on there. They'll use option 5, and they'll have option 3 on the plan. So we've been trying to get the designers and stuff back in step with that, saying, okay, if you're going to go with a partial height block, make sure it's on the plan, and then make sure then the contractor uses that. So we've got several houses out there that when we show up, the shingles are all on it, and we've got a hybrid, and it's not done correctly, so then they have to figure out how to straighten it out. So I think it's just a learning process that we have to work through, and to get the correct information on the plans, so then the framer can follow through on it and do it correctly.
Mr. Ferdine?
I guess I should put this on the record, I guess. In speaking back to Mr. Michelson's question earlier, I have the regulations in front of me on professional conduct, and there is no specific item under 36210 about walking around at your neighbor's house and finding something, that's a code violation. But there are items under 36210A1 and 36210B regarding in the course of one's duties, you have those registration obligations. So for the record, the regulations are under 36210, and anything above and beyond that would be at the registrant's item. So I had to put that on record because I was on record earlier saying one thing.
So we can drive the horizon.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else for the good of the order? Wait for motion to close. Mr. Donald moved and seconded. Thank you very much, all, and until we meet again.
Yes.